Hi everyone, welcome to this video on lesson 5 of the reproduction scheme of work. This one is on sex and fertilization, and I think it's worth starting in the same place that we ended the last lesson with this overview of the menstrual cycle. And what we're going to do in today's lesson, it's a bit like the stories I used to absolutely love as a kid, where you could kind of make different choices and go to a different page depending on which choice you took in the story. So what we said last time was that this cycle happens if, after day 14, fertilization doesn't occur. So I'm going to add a note in here if fertilization does not occur. And it would be worth, when you're starting to teach this lesson, it would be worth doing some kind of whiteboard questioning just to check students can remember the main parts of the menstrual cycle. You might even want to give them a kind of blank sheet of the menstrual cycle and fill in what happens at the different stages. And what we're then going to do is add a kind of second option to our story, another branch. It's like turning to a different page. So what we're going to do here is add another option down here. So I'm going to just move this down. So again, we can recap with them either by whiteboard questioning or going through it. At day 5, the egg starts to develop in the ovary, the uterus lining starts to thicken. Day 14, the egg is released to the oviduct. And if fertilization does occur, fertilization, remember, is the big idea that we're really organising our entire scheme of work around. So it's really important to stress this. So if fertilization does occur, well, what happens next? So I'm going to take my pencil and if firstly what I can do is show kind of what happens in the meantime. And again, a visualizer isn't necessarily the best way to do this. There's a really good video that I have shared in the slides made by the BBC, and I think that gives as good an overview of what's going on as anything else. But if we've got our egg here in the oviduct like this, so you could add some sperms. You might want to emphasize that this is not scale. Sperms are the tiniest cells in the human body, eggs are the largest. But anyway, so we can add our sperms going towards there. And if fertilization does occur, we can zoom in on what goes on here. Follows. And again, you may wish to use the visualizer, you may wish to use diagrams as well. So the first thing that we can talk about is, well, what is fertilization? Fertilization is where, if this is our very large egg cell like this, the sperm cell actually is taken inside. And what we have is a fusing of these two, which students may know already, but you can teach this explicitly as well. Fusing just means joining together, becoming one. Then what you can do is show the next stage, and we'll cover this in more detail in the next lesson, but the next stage is that these cells start to reproduce. So fairly soon after that, in a matter of days, I don't want this to look like a solid, I just want it to look like a clump of cells. What we then have is a collection of cells starting to reproduce that is then going to pass from the oviduct into the uterus. And I should have drawn here that this uterus has this already thickening lining like this. And then what happens if fertilization occurs? So this is fertilization actually happening. And then what I'm going to draw down here is one final image, like so. Which is this collection of cells here is going to gather here, and something called implantation happens. So this gets implanted, it kind of nestles itself within the lining of the uterus, which is what is going to help it grow. And that's also what is going to stop the rest of the menstrual cycle from happening. That's going to trigger, via various hormones, it's going to prevent the uterus lining from breaking down, the fact that implantation occurs, and it's going to allow that embryo to develop into a baby over the 9-month gestation period. So I need to label this. This is called implantation. As follows. And really, the rest of the lesson is just about kind of going into more detail about this process. But again, what I hope you can see, quite often when this is taught, is it's like, okay, man and woman have sex, fertilization happens. We just tell students all this stuff, but we don't relate it to the broader menstrual cycle. And I think this way of laying it out, if I just zoom back up here, of saying, well, this always happens day 5, but then at around day 14, you've got a fork in the road, you've got this choice of what goes on. That gives students a really clear organizing framework with which they can make sense of what's happening. So then the other things to talk about in this lesson are just as easy to explain with either videos or going through the slides or whatever. So it's things like what's happening during sex and the fact that ejaculation is causing sperms to go as far as possible to give them the best chance of reaching the oviduct for fertilization to happen. Again, all comes back to the big idea of fertilization. You can talk about some of the features of sperm cells that allow them to do this. So the fact they've got lots of mitochondria, so they can swim really far, so they've got loads of energy and so on. Again, it maximizes the chance of fertilization occurring. You could talk about the fact that semen that's ejaculated during sex contains absolutely loads and loads and loads and loads of sperm cells, because most of them won't make it. There's this really, really high attrition rate, so it's kind of a miracle if one gets there. You can talk about how sperm cells can get implanted into the walls of the oviduct and kept there until well, I was going to talk about LH, but until the egg is released and ready to be fertilized. And yeah, you can even, if you're interested, and I think it's really helpful for students, talk about the way fertilization happens and the egg forms this kind of hard layer around the outside, which is protective. All of that stuff is really, really helpful. And the more detail you wish to share with students, the better. I mean, that's obviously great. What I would say from the curriculum point of view is that this sort of diagram is going to help organize all this. So what's important is that we give students the framework, because then all of that extra detail that you can layer up through your teaching is being added to something that's already organized in a coherent scheme. Yeah, as I've said before, the BBC video on fertilization is really, really brilliant. I would strongly recommend you show that to students, provided you've given them this organizing framework to begin with. In the next lesson, I believe we are looking at, we're beginning to look at gestation and how the baby starts to develop.